If We're Being Honest. Written by The Queen of Wump. Read for you by Charcoal Bits. Chapter 8. Sunshine. Trigger warnings in this chapter include self-hatred, self-deprecation, panic attacks, fainting, depression, mentioned disregard for mental disorders, emotional neglect, mentioned severe child abuse, and neglect. Kyoka was really worried about Shinso, but didn't let it show until he finally left with Aizawa. Once he was gone, she pretty much turned into a crying mess, along with pretty much everyone else. She knew that she normally wasn't an emotional person. She was supposed to be a rock, the sturdy friend, the one that lightened the mood, the one that never wavered and was there to lean on whenever she was needed. But she couldn't help it. Finding out about how horribly he had been treated made something deep inside of her shatter into 1,000,001 pieces. Maybe it was the fact that she had been the one to realize how horrific his past really was. Maybe it was the fact that he looked like he expected to be hit at every sudden movement. Maybe it was the way he had clung onto Aizawa like a child that never received any love. It wasn't pretty, he had said, but she just couldn't stop crying. Maybe it was because this was the last straw. Because it wasn't just him, was it? It was so many of them. Midoriya was a victim of their quirky society, and so was Kirishima, whom she had thought to be so strong in his own confidence. Hell, even Bakugo had been raised to believe he was better than everyone else for so long just because of his quirk. And now he was left with a weird mix between superiority and an inferiority complex, which she knew he would never admit under the threat of death. And Todoroki. Oh God, Todoroki. She started crying even harder when she thought about him all over again. Everyone had tried to put on a brave face for Todoroki when he was still there the other night, but as soon as he had gone to bed, most of them had immediately gone off the deep end in terms of emotional stress. So many of them hadn't slept that night, and even Kyoka had let out a few tears, because at that point her heart was still being held together by a few frayed strings. Until tonight, when those strings had finally snapped. Why did everything have to be so fucking awful? Hey, Momo said when she saw Kyoka's silent crying turn into silent sobs. She put an arm around her and didn't really try to mask her own tears. It's gonna be alright. Kyoka nodded silently as she rested her head on Momo's chest and wrapped her arms around her, not caring about how ridiculous she probably looked. The taller girl had started getting a bit fuller these past few weeks, which was incredible. She had been dangerously underweight, and only because her parents had her on that fucking ridiculous diet. With her quirk, that was a huge problem. Kyoka had nearly gone and kicked her parents' asses when she found out about it all. This thing is really just a crying quirk, Kyoka said with a small shrug. I mean, really, that's all it's good for. I'm into that, Kaminari said dazedly. He wasn't looking too hot himself, tear tracks painting his face like some damn watercolor piece. Do you think he'll be okay? Midoriya asked softly. He, as per usual, looked the worst out of all of them, because of course he did. Kyoka almost smiled at how compassionate he really was and how much he cared about all of them. I'm sure he will be, Kyoka said, doing her best to sound steady. It didn't really work. Aizawa won't let him get hurt anymore. And we won't either. They sat there for a long time, but they didn't watch any more movies that night. She had a feeling they wouldn't be sleeping anytime soon. The next morning, during class, was when they all saw Shinso again, when he arrived with Aizawa right before the bell rang. Kyoka tried her best not to stare at him as he went to his seat, but she probably wasn't doing a very good job. Surprisingly, he didn't look that bad. In fact, he looked more well-rested than she had seen him in a long time, which was more than she could say about herself, at least. The homeroom ended and everybody basically swarmed him. Are you okay? Was the first thing out of her own mouth, which was pretty much what everyone else was asking too. I'm alright now, I promise, he said with a smile, and Kyoka felt her shoulders, and vaguely saw all her other classmates too, literally sag in relief. Aizawa's adopting me, so that's nice. He's what? Kaminari screeched. I knew it. Shoto, that is not the same thing, Midoriya said with an eye roll. It was later in the week when it happened. So many secrets had been spilled that Kayoko wasn't sure why it caught her so off guard. Maybe it was because she was so sleep-deprived. Maybe it was the fact that she truly wasn't expecting this one. Todoroki had always been somewhat sad, as had Shinso, and maybe all the others had been shocking, but this was just in a whole other level entirely. Maybe it was because he was her best friend this time. This is the third time you've forgotten your homework, Aizawa deadpanned. I get that you actually forgot it, since you can't lie, but why can't you just, I don't know, put it in your bag? Snickers rose throughout the class as Kaminari smiled sheepishly. I guess I'm just an airhead, sir, he said matter-of-factly. Aizawa rolled his eyes. I know you think this is a joke, but you were in the top hero school in the country. Try a little harder, okay? I am trying, sir, Kaminari said, a little bit more serious. Nobody picked up on the change, though, since the smile was still half on his face. She should have noticed. Maybe she didn't because she was so tired. Damn it, she should have noticed a long time ago. Well, you need to try harder. It's not going to be like this when you go pro. Missing paperwork could mean legal repercussions, not just grades. You need to start taking these classes seriously. I am taking them seriously, Kaminari yelled, smile suddenly gone. I'm trying so hard! Kayoko felt her mouth drop open faster than it ever had in her life. It was like a switch had been flipped in the electric user. 1 second, he was the same happy-go-lucky guy, and the next he was staring at Aizawa like he had been told his entire family was dead. What was going on? Kaminari looked down at his desk, seemingly unaware of the tension and questioning stares around him. I'm trying so hard, he repeated quietly, and no one ever notices. They just notice how much I fail. I don't know what's wrong with me. Everyone else can do all this stuff without a problem. He stopped to glare up at Aizawa, but the look was so full of pain it probably didn't have the effect he'd been wanting. No one else stares at their textbook for hours without even seeing it. No one else has to laugh off their stupidity because they don't understand why they don't understand anything. Aizawa looked at the boy with wide eyes. Kaminari. He continued on like he didn't even hear him, slamming his fists onto the table so hard Kayoko felt herself flinch, though she knew it had nothing to do with her quirk or how loud it had been. And I have to play dumb too, because if I'm good at some things, that means that if I'm not good at other things, I'm not trying hard enough. So everyone will always see me as the dumb blonde that no one will ever understand. Kaminari, Aizawa said again, obviously at a loss at the sudden shift in his student. I'm sure that's not true. Of course it's true, Kaminari said, almost bitterly, but it mostly just sounded like a statement of sad acceptance. I'm under a truth quirk. I can't lie. I know what they all think of me. They all openly call me dumb, idiot friend, all of the time. Why does no one else's brain skip from one idea to the other? Why am I like this? Was Kaminari crying? I hate myself most of the time, he said as a tear rolled down his cheek and landed on his desk. I can't do anything right. And don't even get me started on my quirk. Do you really think all that? Kayoko found herself whispering. Was that a lump in her throat? Was she about to start crying too? Oh wait, her vision was blurry. She already was. Hadn't she cried enough already? Hadn't she had her heart broken enough for one lifetime? Kaminari jolted, like he had forgotten that they were all still there. Usually that would have been funny, but now... now I've done it, he said weakly, standing up abruptly. Can't even remember where I am anymore. Kaminari, wait. But her voice died in her throat because the blonde was already out the door, book bag forgotten. What was that? Kirishima asked shakily, like everything didn't just change in a heartbeat for the 100th time. Everybody walked back to the dorms together, with the exception of their happy-go-lucky electric friend. Although, now Kyoka could only think of how much of that must have been an act. Not many words were exchanged, but Kyoka didn't mind. Her thoughts were running too fast for a conversation of any kind. Her mind flashed to every instance she had made fun of Kaminari for his lack of book smarts, or street smarts, or any sort of smarts. She hadn't meant any of it. Of course she hadn't. He was one of her best friends, but she also remembered all the other times everyone else in the class had done the same. Over and over and over, and maybe Kyoka had believed the teasing, deep down. That he was honestly dumber than the rest of them, just because he couldn't focus on a textbook. God, what had she been thinking? Kaminari had every right to be mad at all of them, but instead he had chosen to place the hatred on himself. That was absolutely ridiculous, but if Kyoka had somewhat believed it when it was only joking about it in passing, what did being told he was dumb every second of every day do to his subconscious? Was this something new at UA, or had this been going on for even longer? Some of the words Kaminari had said hit her like a punch in the gut as she remembered them, and it was just as painful hearing them for the first time, if not more so. They just noticed how much I fail. And really, he was right. Nobody ever said a word to him if he did something right, unless it was to mock him for not doing something wrong. Of course it's true. He really thought all of that was true. Kyoka remembered something Bakugo had said about how you could think something was true and still say it even if it was completely false. I know what they all think of me. She was going to punch herself in the face. I think you were right, Todoroki suddenly said at the back of the group. Midoriya sighed. Yeah, probably. You knew about it? Shinso suddenly hissed, rounding on the green-haired teen. You knew that he... Oh, no, not that, Midoriya said quickly, waving his arms around like he always did. I just have this idea. It's only a theory. We don't know if it's actually happening, or if it's just a speculation, or if this whole thing is just getting us in the worst ways, or... Deku, shut up and get to the point, Bakugo deadpanned. He looked just as emotionless as always, but Kyoka could see the hint of distress in his eyes that he was trying hard to hide. Oh, right. Midori rubbed the back of his neck. And just so you know, Aizawa said not to tell you, so please don't get mad. Deku! All right. This quirk isn't just affecting our words, it's affecting our emotions. Nobody spoke for the longest time. Kyoka felt like her brain was imploding on itself. That explains so much, Kirishima said finally. Like, so much. And you just let us what? Shinso said, clearly a bit ticked off, and Kyoka winced at the thought of his panic attacks the other day. This really did explain a lot. Think we were emotionally overwhelmed for no reason? I'm really sorry, Midoriya said quietly. Aizawa said since there was no actual proof, it wasn't the best idea to say anything, and that it would only make everyone feel worse. Well, that's fair, Kyoka found herself saying, not bothering to stop herself from sounding just as angry as Shinso. I definitely feel worse. Because really, it made so much sense. Everyone was so much more emotional than they normally were, herself included. It explained Shinso's panic attacks and Kirishima's breakdown and the ever-stoic Todoroki crying his eyes out over a long-dead brother. It explained Kaminari crying over a piece of homework. So what is it even doing? She asked, trying not to sound shaken. Is it hyping up our negative emotions or something? I don't think so, Midori said, because of course it wasn't that simple. I think it's amplifying all of them. Not just amplifying them, per se, and just not just the bad either, since so many people confess their feelings for each other so fast, in a sense that we can't lie to ourselves about how we're feeling, like when something horrible happens and you push it down, it's like when PTSD develops. We can't just ignore the bad feelings now. That's so ridiculous, Bakugo yelled. So if we have repressed trauma, it'll just fucking bubble to the surface. It makes sense, Tokoyami said solemnly. The darkness often has ways of showing up when we least expect it. Oh, can it with your emo shit! So was that why she confessed to Momo? Kyoka couldn't help but wonder if their whole new relationship was built on some quirk-based lie. She didn't want the only good thing to come from all of this to be some twisted trick. She didn't want to wonder for the rest of her life if Momo really loved her or if she was just whacked up on some toddler's power. Hey, I know what you're thinking, Momo said quietly, grabbing her hand and giving it a squeeze. No, this wasn't forced onto us. It was our true feelings, just dug up a little bit. Kayoko nodded, trying to keep her composure, which was a little easier now, if only because she knew why she was so upset, and that helped her fill her with anger instead. Yeah, you're right, you and that big brain of yours, she said somewhat teasingly. Momo simply smiled fondly and bumped their shoulders together. Guys, Kirishima said, and Kayoko looked over and saw the heartbreak in his eyes. If we can't lie to ourselves and it's all true, then Kaminari... Kayoko felt her stomach plummet right back to the floor. Kaminari really felt that way. Maybe he lied to himself a lot, or maybe he just really felt like that all the time. She hoped it was the former, and then the thought made her feel better for a moment. But then Kayoko remembered something else he had said. I hate myself most of the time. So no, it wasn't the quirk. And even if it was still his true feelings coming to light, which somehow might have been worse, because he would have been lying to himself about being happy. Why am I like this? He had asked. Kayoko wanted to give him a hug and tell him he was amazing just the way he was, but she couldn't. He was gone because she had pushed him away. Denki was going to pass out. He was going to fall over and die. He was sure of it. Although, could he fall over if he was already on the floor? He supposed he could if he tried hard enough. His breathing was on hyperdrive, but he somehow still wasn't managing to get enough air into his lungs. He was starting to feel lightheaded, and a rush of fear went through him at the thought of one of his classmates finding him passed out on the ground. He didn't need them to think he was even more pathetic than he already was. Unfortunately, stubbornness was not his forte, unlike Bakugo. He still struggled to intake air, like the knockoff, broken-down vacuum cleaner that he was, and now was probably very close to actually kneeling over. He barely heard the knock on the door right behind him. Kaminari? That was Kirishima. His voice was soft, like he was approaching a frightened animal. You in there, bro? He tried to tell him to leave, that he was fine, which he knew wouldn't have come out of his mouth regardless, because that would have been the biggest lie of the night. But a wheeze just escaped him instead. He wasn't sure how loud it was, but from the sharp intake of breath behind him, it must have sounded pretty not good. Hang in there, Cammy, Kirishima said. Can we come in? Knock on the door if we can. He felt his head start to spin. He wasn't sure, but he thought he heard whispered words outside his door. All right, Kirishima had said we, hadn't he? He wasn't alone. Did Denki want to be alone? He wasn't sure. He was just pretty certain that if he kept breathing like this, he was going to tap out. Actually, his vision was already getting dark, wasn't it? Maybe if he just tried closing his eyes for a moment. He must have actually passed out like a freaking loser, because the next thing he knew, he was laying on the floor with a blob of red over his face. Breathe in and out, okay? He sounded panicked, and oh, that was Kirishima. He must have come in when he heard him slump over. At least that answered the stupid question of if he could fall over if he was already on the ground. He followed Kirishima's breathing, and it was much easier to control now that he had something to listen to and think. Oh, that's normal, isn't it? He managed to get his head to stop spinning and his eyes to focus again. He saw the worried face of his friend above him. He shifted his gaze to see the rest of their friends, who all looked more or less the same. Shinso was closest, whose eyes bags seemed much deeper than they had that morning. And Sarah and Bakugo were right behind him. The angry blonde actually looked concerned for once, which nearly made him laugh. But his lip only quirked upwards a tiny bit before crashing right back down. Jiro was still in the hallway, like she was scared to come closer for some reason. And she looked wrecked, which she hadn't been expecting. Great. Was she going to pity him now? Or was this true concern? She had looked just the same the other night when Shinso had relieved his oh-so-wonderful pass. Maybe she did really care. She was his best friend, after all. You good? Kirishima asked, somewhat breathlessly. Denki looked back over to see him still staring at him intensely with heavy concern. He mustered up enough energy to give him a smile. Other than clonking out on the ground. Bakugo snorted. He's fine, idiots. Well, you had us so fucking worried, Zero said, bringing a hand to his forehead like he was going to pass out next. We were just talking to Jiro and then heard you fall. We're glad that you're okay, Shinso said, rather softly, leaning back onto his ankles in relief. I don't know what we would have done if you weren't. He's not okay, Jiro suddenly hissed. Do you not remember why we came up here in the first place? If Denki could have frozen, he would have, but he already wasn't moving. Still, it felt like ice had been poured into his veins and down his back. They meant physically, genius, Bakugo said, and Denki could practically hear the eye roll without even looking at him. I know that, she said, twisting her earlobes aggressively, but he's still not okay. Are you okay? Kirishima asked him instead of arguing with her, worry still ever present in his eyes. You know, emotionally or whatever. Denki started to sit up, and all of them jolted like they wanted to push him right back down. He waved off their concern, but nonetheless took Kirishima's hand and sat up and leaned back against the now open door. Not really, he said against his will. I thought that was perfectly clear. Kirishima winced, and Jiro, who had just come around the corner, smirked slightly before all traces of happiness disappeared from her completely. And this wasn't supposed to happen. He was supposed to be the friend that never stopped smiling. He was supposed to be the class clown, the one that other people depended on to lighten the mood no matter how stupid it made him look. They didn't laugh with him the same way they did with the others, with Denki. They were always laughing at him, not with him. Which was okay, because that was his role in the group. That was the part he was meant to play. The dumb blonde that made them say, oh, come on, Ari, like he was some sort of child. Yep, he was fine with it. But now, they were all here, staring at him, and knowing that no, he wasn't always happy. He didn't want to be the dumb one. He didn't want to be looked down on just because he didn't understand geometry. He had been fine keeping the secret for most of the time, so what had happened? Maybe he was just so sleep-deprived from finding out Shinso and even Todoroki. How he had lied awake at night, unable to sleep because he just kept thinking about how awful it all was. He knew a lot of other people in the class had been having the same problem, so maybe he wasn't that much of a mess. Regardless, he had still screwed up once more. Way to go, Denki. I'm here! A female voice suddenly screeched, followed by Mina barreling around the corner and almost falling onto the floor from her momentum. She leaned down, hands resting on her knees as she tried to get control of her rapid breaths. I'm so sorry, She paused to gasp for air. I had to change out my tampon. All the guys, Denki included, suddenly turned very red in the face. TMI, Mina, Sarah said rather uncomfortably when no one else spoke. And then, for some stupid, unknown reason, Denki laughed. He literally started crying from laughter, unable to stop the hysterics that escaped him. Soon everyone else was laughing too, even Bakugo, who was hiding his chuckles behind his hand. It was true what they said. The higher the stress, the more you laughed. It was just so ridiculous and unnecessary and so different from everything else that had come up from this stupid quirk recently that they couldn't help it. It was nice. So nice to just laugh and not worry. Not worry about how his life was over, or how he was a failure, or how he was probably going to get kicked out of school if his grades didn't improve soon, or how his parents might fucking disown him if he flunked out of high school, or how all his friends would turn their backs on him once they realized how much of a joke he really was. He realized he was the only one still laughing. Wait, no. His laughter had turned into outright sobbing. Wonderful. Hey, Kirishima whispered, reaching forward like he was going to hug him, but stopping at the last minute, deciding to just put a hand on his shoulder instead. It's alright, okay? It's gonna be alright. Denki put his face in his hands and tried to stop crying, which he was failing miserably at, but he shook his head. But it's not. And that's okay too, Shinso said softly. Denki peeked through his fingers to see him kneeling right next to him. We can still help you make it okay. He shook his head again, trying not to choke on his own tears. I don't know how you can help me not being an idiot, but I appreciate the thought. Oh, Kaminari, Jiro said suddenly, dropping down to the floor in front of him like her strings had been cut. It was what she often said, but the tone was completely different than usual. It was normally said in exasperation or even fondness, but now it just sounded tired and heartbroken. You're not... She took a shuddered breath and put a hand on his knee. You're not an idiot. Of course I am, he said, wiping at his eyes as he tried to physically force himself to stop crying. That's what you all have been saying this whole time, right? We weren't serious, man. Kirishima said quietly. You didn't seem to mind. You always seemed happy. I guess I am sometimes, Dinky said with a shrug. Like, I'm glad I can make you all happy, and I'm happy when I'm with you I can pretend you see me as an equal. What kind of bullshit is that? Bakugo snapped. Denki looked over at him with wide eyes and saw that he was glaring at him. Of course we see you as an equal. You're one of my best friends, and this group wouldn't be the same without you. Everybody stared at him. God fucking damn it. He looked like he was about ready to rip his own hair out. If this quirk makes me want to say one more stupid thing, I'm barricading myself in my room. Denki didn't care, because he was not crying more now. Nope. He wasn't even looking at Bakugo through the tears in his eyes like he wanted to give him the biggest hug in the history of hugs. Can I hug you? He asked anyway, despite the fact that he knew Bakugo absolutely did not do hugs. Except for Kirishima, but that was a given. Bakugo looked like he wanted to punch him into the sun. Denki prepared himself for the worst. Of course you can. And then felt his jaw drop right to the floor. Bakugo looked like regret had crash-landed on his chest, but nonetheless begrudgingly opened his arms. Because, try as he might to deny it, he was still telling the truth. And that made Denki's heart sore. It turned out that Bakugo was actually absolutely amazing at giving hugs. He found this out as he crashed into him and wrapped his arms around him, trying not to sob into his shirt. His strong arms felt so safe, and suddenly he found himself jealous of Kirishima's hug privileges. The rest of them were amazing huggers too. They all piled on him not long after. Oi, I said I'd give him a hug, not you lot. Too late, Mina said in a sing-song voice. We're here to stay, Blasty. Bakugo grumbled something under his breath about annoying pink-haired weirdos. You know we're all here for you, Kaminari, right? That was Shinso, who was part of this weird hug pile too, by the sounds of it. He also didn't really do hugs, so Denki was suddenly that much more grateful for his friends. He blinked the spontaneous moisture from his eyes. I guess I know now. Alright, that's enough, Bakugo suddenly growled, not so forcefully, pushing them all off. I have limits, idiots. Kirishima smacked him on the arm. Bakugo gave him an incredulous look, and they proceeded to have a conversation with just their facial expressions. The blonde finally groaned at the end of their telepathic communication. I didn't... Why is being nice so hard? I didn't mean that you're actually an idiot, dunceface. He shook his head slightly as if to clear the etch-a-sketch in his brain. Kaminari, I just call you that because you're like my idiots or whatever. Because you always do the dumbest shit together. Like prank Aizawa and get detention for a week. Denki laughed weakly. Yeah, that was pretty dumb. But his face? Priceless. You know I never meant it either, right? Jiro said, at his side once more. She gently took his hand, and Denki looked up and saw the overwhelming guilt and tears in her eyes. It made his heart break a little more once he got over the shock. I never meant to make you feel like that. I'm so sorry. He squeezed her hand reassuringly and wiped his eyes with his free hand. It's not your fault. Any of you. I've felt like this most of my life. I'm behind everyone else, and every negative thing anyone says just hits me so much harder than it should. I can't focus on anything important, and I can't do anything right. Someone put a hand to his mouth to stop his rambling. He was immensely grateful because he didn't want them to hear any more of his problems if he couldn't help it. He vaguely realized he was crying again as the hand disappeared. He followed it with his eyes and saw it connected to Mina on the other side. Then, Cammy, I think you have ADHD. His mind was a blank, like he had overused his quirk several times in a row. What? ADHD, she said again, tilting her head and giving him a sad smile. It fits all your symptoms, like how you're always fidgeting with Ojiro's tail and, like, looking out the window during class. What do the windows have to do with anything? He asked, still not fully processing what she was saying. You can't focus because her brain works differently. She tapped her temple a few times. You don't produce enough serotonin or, like, dopamine? I can't remember. I just know a bit because my brother has it. But... She racked his brain, trying to figure out why the sinking feeling was... A sinking feeling was suddenly engulfing his chest. That doesn't, exist. What? Shinso asked, bewildered. Why wouldn't it exist? It's like an excuse, right? He said, finally remembering. He was so young, and it was his parents when his parents still had faith that he would do better in school when he got older. Mom, I was reading this book from the library. I think I might have the thingy in it. Oh, his mother had said, smiling. And what's that? I think it's called ADHD. Her smile dropped immediately. That's not real, Denki, and even if it was, you don't have it. But I can't focus. I can't sit still in class. That's just you being lazy. His father had suddenly cut in, reading the newspaper in his big armchair. You just need to study more, and no son of mine is going to have some mental disorder. You hear? There was a dangerous edge to his voice then, so little him had quickly nodded. Okay, I'll try harder. And I just have to try harder, he said, shrugging. Like Aizawa said, if I had just put the damn paper in my bag. That's not what ADHD is, Cammy, Cyril said. It's not like you could have tried harder to remember your paper, or like you could try harder when you're already staring at a textbook with nothing to distract you. But I get distracted anyway. Exactly, Bakugo snapped. You're just you're just wired all different. That's why my tutoring never fucking helps you. So I'm gonna change the way I do it so you can actually learn shit for once. Dinky stared at him and felt his chest begin to shake. He stopped to wipe his nose with his sleeve. You would do that for me? Bakugo clicked his tongue. Of course I would. And this fucking quirk better end sooner. I'm gonna lose my mind. But you're so nice, Mina said, dragging out the last word and leaning on him dramatically. He promptly pushed her off with a scowl. You're all gonna regret this. Sure we will. I think Kaminari is going to be okay. Izuku looked up from his textbook to see Shoto walking out of the elevator towards him. He automatically moved over so he could sit down, and promptly leaned his whole body on him once he did. That's a relief, he said. Who told you? I went by his room to go check on him, he said with a shrug. I didn't open the door, but it sounded like all of his friends were playing video games with him. They all sounded quite happy. That's good, Izuku said, putting his head on Shoto's shoulder as he closed his eyes. That's really good. I don't think I'll be able to handle any more breakdowns. I'm almost out of tears. He felt Shoto chuckle beside him. I don't think you could ever run out of those. Want to bet? Actually, no. I'll definitely lose. Shoto smiled lightly and put his arm over his shoulders. You just care so much. There's nothing wrong with that. Izuku reached over and grabbed his hand with a small shrug. I guess so. Hey, listen to me. Shoto squeezed his hand, and Izuku looked up to see a loving smile on his face that made his heart combust on sight. I mean it. You're wonderfully caring, and you'll make an amazing hero. I'm just so glad you chose to love me. That last part seemed to be uttered against the jewel-haired boy's will, and he suddenly turned sheepish and bright red. Izuku hoped he wasn't implying that he thought he wasn't enough for him. You're right. I did choose to love you, and it makes me happy every single day. Shoto smiled once more, and he was even brighter than his fire could ever hope to be. They sat in companionable silence for a while after that, simply existing together. Izuku continued to read his book while Shoto pulled out a tiny crossword puzzle. It was wonderful. So much better than what was about to happen afterwards. Afterwards, Izuku would desperately wish he could go back to this moment and just sit in oblivious silence for a while longer, to have one more moment of peace before it was ripped away. They were having another movie night. They were practically every other day at this point, so they didn't bother to move as their classmates began to filter into the common room as dinner hours came and passed. It wasn't every night that they ate together, so on nights like tonight, they simply ate whatever they wanted, whatever they could find. As it neared 7, the unofficial time that the movie nights had begun to start at, the self-proclaimed Baku Squad came out of the elevator doors, laughing and talking like nothing was wrong with the world. You lot are gonna give me a headache, Katsuki muttered before heading off to the kitchen, most likely to heat up something he had already cooked. How are you feeling, Kaminari? Sue asked. She never really worried about the awkwardness, that was for sure. I'm doing better, he said, smiling. We came to the conclusion that I probably have ADHD. He suddenly froze, like he Like, he definitely didn't want everyone to know about it. He opened his mouth back up, probably to try and brush it off what he had just said. "That's a very important thing to know about," Ida said with a nod. "I would suggest asking Aizawa to help you get a formal diagnosis so UA can accommodate for your learning differences." Something shone in Kaminari's eyes as he stared at Ida in apparent shock. Izuku suddenly noticed the area around his eyes was slightly pink. "Yeah, sounds good." Then Uraraka and Katsuki came into the room at the same time. They locked eyes with each other, and immediately tension spiked. Izuku really should have known this was coming. The girl hadn't at all been satisfied with what Katsuki had told him about his quirk, even though he explicitly stated that he knew it was no excuse for the years of bullying. Uraraka was still not convinced in the slightest. It started out simple enough. "Why is it that you never got even a detention for bullying Deku?" The sentence seemed to be asked against her will, since she knew Izuku didn't want her to start anything, but she didn't seem at all that apologetic about what she had asked. "I told you I was suspended, round face." Then it escalated. It escalated a lot. It escalated too fast that it left Izuku's head spinning dangerously as he tried to keep up with who was screaming at who. No one really even took sides. They were all just trying to calm the two of them down from the hellfire of anger they were trapped in. But even then, a few people started to argue with Uraraka. They didn't even say that he was bad now, or that he was an irredeemable asshole, just that he probably got off a little too easy for tormenting him. Even his own friends were starting to look a little unsure of themselves. Izuku could tell Katsuki saw it too. Did any of them care that Izuku didn't care in the slightest? No. Did they care that he had already realized what he'd done was bad? No. He had to suffer for his actions, apparently. Izuku was having none of it. That's bullshit. Uraraka turned to him with wide eyes. Whether it was from his words or the cursing, he wasn't sure. "I'm not saying he had to be expelled or anything," Uraraka shouted before turning right back around. "But have you ever had any real consequences for your actions?" Katsuki glared at her, like a heat was radiating from him that seemed unlike anything he had ever put off before. "I damn well had consequences for my actions, Deku already told you." "Yeah, well, calling your mommy wasn't enough of a punishment for breaking his arm." Izuku tried to reach out to her. "Well, he also got suspended, right? And the school thought it was enough, so..." "Well," Uraraka said, running on Izuku and slapping his hand away, "that's not good enough for me." Something deep inside Katsuki visibly snapped. Something deep inside of him had been shattered beyond repair. Somehow, Izuku knew something big was going to come out, as if the air all around them was suddenly 20 degrees colder. Call it some sort of sixth sense, but he just knew. He just didn't realize how big it would really be. "So getting beaten until I couldn't see straight and locked into a closet for 3 fucking days isn't good enough for you?" The silence that followed his scream was deafening, and Katsuki took one look at everyone's shell-shocked faces before bolting right out the front door. And Izuku, funnily enough, was not out of tears. Hey guys. So, how y'all doing? I don't have really any excuses for my absence. I was just lacking motivation and I don't know. Anyways, I'm going to try my very, very hardest to get the rest of this series out before I start school on September 6th. But I'm not going to make any promises because we all very well know that I am a lying liar who lies and I will not keep them. But anyways, what's new with you guys? Things have really been the same for me. My youngest brother turned 1 and that's so crazy. I can't believe he's been around for a year already. And I started a new channel, specifically for my art. I don't think I'm going to post anything on it until I finish the sketchbook that I'm working on right now, because I really like the first half of it that I've had finished right now, and I think I'm going to start off with that one, which would be my 4th sketchbook, the 4th numbered one. I'm going to start off with that one. But anyways, I'll put like an announcement on this channel for it, and I'll put a link to my new channel in that post when I get around to posting it. But anyways, have a good day or night or afternoon, wherever you are. And take care of yourselves, man. Drink water. Coffee does not count as a meal. Eat a snack. Just be good to yourselves because you guys deserve it. Anyways, thank you for still sticking around, even though I was gone for so long. And yeah, so hope you all had, I don't know, man. I don't know what to say. I don't know what else to say, but yeah. Have a great night or day or afternoon, whatever. Bye-bye now.